Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, May 27th, 2021, and today we're going to be talking about Representative Matt Gaetz, a scandal-plagued potential candidate for the 2024 presidential election. Now, Matt Gaetz says today, not publicly, but through a text message released to Newsmax, discussing the the New York Post, discussing the 2024 presidential election. And a lot of media attention has jumped onto him largely because of the scandals that have been tackled onto him. We'll talk about those later on in the video, but the main takeaway from this statement is that Matt Gaetz truly believes that he could defeat Joe Biden in the 2024 election, and says, and quote, "I support Donald Trump for president. I've directly encouraged him to run, and he gives me every indication he will. If Trump doesn't run, I'm sure I could defeat whatever remains of Joe Biden by 2024, end quote. Now, I want to remind you that this is an elected representative in the United States Congress. This is someone who is, straight out of the state of Florida, that's representing his constituents, 500,000 of them, in Washington, D.C. And for this statement to be released, first of all, insinuating what seems to be kind of negative about Joe Biden, you can expect from a Republican, but whatever remains kind of sounds a little sketchy. In addition, he seems to be saying, if President Trump doesn't run, I'm going to run. And that's quite interesting. The fact that he's confident he could win really goes to show how far and how disconnected he is from reality. Because at the end of the day, Matt Gaetz is one of the most scandal-plagued candidates, and it seems as if he's in good company, with Green and him coming across the state of Georgia and making these statements and preposterous claims to drive more and more and more media attention towards both of these people. You have Marjorie Taylor Greene, a Republican from Georgia, who just recently compared mask mandates to the Holocaust. Now you have Matt Gaetz, someone who was a part of a trafficking scandal that has pretty much dominated the media coverage of Matt Gaetz as a representative. And looking at this scandal itself, it gets even worse. It's something that has been under, discussion since March of 2021 and continues to unfold with more and more revelations, with more people willing to speak, with officials, and more coming out against Matt Gaetz. This is only getting worse and worse and worse as time does go on. Matt Gaetz is in a position where time is running out, where all of these allegations, this discussion and this investigation into what he is doing and what he has done in the past is quite interesting. And it's quite unfortunate to see that an elected official, someone who's supposed to represent a significant portion of the population in Florida, is caught up in such horrific situations and is supposedly a part. I'm not going to say that what we are seeing here is unequivocally true, because I'm not going to rule and decide on something that hasn't been decided on, but I am going to say everything about American politics, at least on the national level, is very much about optics. And I say that all the time because it's true. And that's exactly what's happening here. Matt Gaetz is so closely tied to this scandal that this could be the career finisher for him if he decides to run for president. Because right now, he's safe and secure. The reason why Matt Gaetz can meet with Marjorie Taylor Greene and travel around the state of Georgia, the reason why he hasn't been forced to retire after this by his own constituents, is because his district, the first district in the state of Florida, overwhelmingly voted for him in the 2020 election. Looking at his recent few elections, only a few, he hasn't been in Congress long, you'll see that he won his open race by a very large amount and won re-election by a very large amount. All in all, sort of telling us exactly what we need to know about this district. That the first congressional district in the state of Florida is very much pro-Republican, no matter who it is. It reminds me a lot of Marjorie Taylor Greene's district. And this overconfidence, I think, largely comes as a result of, first of all, his congressional district overwhelmingly re-electing him in 2020. In addition, the fact that his approval rating amongst Republicans remains high. And in a district that is overwhelmingly Republican, you'll see here that 63% of Republicans are saying, no, I don't believe Matt Gaetz is guilty for what is being alleged. 18% say yes, but 18% out of the remaining 80%, out of the entirety of the 100%, leaving 80% really doesn't say much. And 72% of Republicans say he does not need to quit. 19% say he needs to resign, but that's not necessarily going to tip over the majority of voters. And, all in all, looking at the approval rating of Matt Gaetz, it's honestly not that bad. if you're looking at the district itself, it's not just this one poll where you can see the question about whether or not he should resign or whether or not they believe that he is guilty. He is still approved of very much in this congressional district. The voters here still approve of Matt Gaetz, regardless of these scandals that seem to be coming across the TV screen, through the radio feed, through social media. They really don't care, or just don't care enough. And for this instance with Matt Gaetz here, I really don't think that he's going to be in a vulnerable position until he decides to run for president. And to put things into perspective, the reason why he's vehemently behind President Trump is because he pretty much has been throughout the entirety of his congressional campaign. Looking at congressional career. For the 115th Congress, which was not that long of a time period under President Trump, he voted with President Trump's wishes 81% of the time. 116th Congress, 89% of the time, and as President Trump was leaving office, 100% of the time. Right now, Matt Gaetz supported President Trump on 85% of positions. And while that isn't as high as some other Republicans, not nearly as high as some others, it's still a very good amount. And if you're looking at this, this reasoning as to why he might be backing President Trump, I think largely because he saw what happened to Trump as an opportunity to turn any type of press, positive or negative, into something beneficial. Anytime his name was mentioned in the media, any type of thing that came out against him, if he could try and avoid talking about it, yet ramp up this media circulation, he probably views this as a very good thing. And for Matt Gaetz to say something so bold and so, clearly disconnected from reality is quite interesting. But I think that he actually might be believing this, largely because he might think he is the next Donald Trump. There is a reason why he is attaching on to President Trump so much. There's a reason why he's saying, I'm encouraging President Trump to run again in 2024. The things that he is revealing to us is that, number one, Trump likely is going to run, but if he doesn't, which also is a possibility, that he believes he could defeat Joe Biden. And I think this underestimation of President Biden is something that needs to be taken a look at, because it wasn't just Matt Gaetz or other Republicans saying Joe Biden could never win the election. It was also President Trump, someone who himself said if you lost to Joe Biden, it would be embarrassing, that you would never ever see him again because of how embarrassing a loss to Joe Biden actually would be. The Republican Party, at least on surface level, never acknowledged the electability and the credibility of Vice President Biden at the time. They pretty much just swept it under the rug or ignored the situation and said, there's no way Joe Biden wins. He has no one at his rallies. He has nothing, going on in his campaign. He's in his basement. There's no way Joe Biden could win. That, combined with the claims of election fraud, fed into this idea that the 2020 election was stolen from Donald Trump. But if you're looking at Matt Gaetz here, he is the only other Republican now added to the list who has publicly expressed interest. The rest are just potential candidates who haven't really spoken on it, other than the fact that, they're saying it's up for consideration. It's not something that they are fueling time and time again. But does Matt Gaetz realistically have a pathway to the primary? Chances are, he's not going to do well. And if you're looking at some of these numbers, answer is absolutely not. I mean, this man isn't even on the polling data, because that's how much voters are saying they don't necessarily support him, or he's not a name that comes to mind when you're looking at some of these election pollsters, because Matt Gaetz realistically will not become the Republican nominee, nor would he win a general election. So all of this is built on the idea that President Trump is not going to run for president, but I think that's honestly very possible. And if Matt Gaetz goes into the 2024 election overly confident or confident at all, it could ultimately harm the GOP if Matt Gaetz becomes the eventual nominee. Obviously, a long shot, nothing that is close to reality at this point, but the same was said about Donald Trump, 2 years prior to him winning the presidency, or even a year and a half out from that 2016 presidential election. So for Matt Gaetz to be in this position where he is already fueling presidential speculation and saying boldly now that he believes he could defeat Joe Biden, he actually might be inching towards a bid for the presidency in 2024. But there is that one condition, if and only if Donald Trump decides not to run. But how would he actually perform? And I don't really want to go ahead and make this video turn into a prediction video. I think that that's something that could be saved for later on, because it is quite interesting to see a Gaetz versus Biden scenario. But I do want to say that it probably won't do well. Matt Gaetz isn't going to help the GOP in many places. In fact, looking at the 2020 map, which I will show you in just a moment, or at least the Democratic states, you'll realize that you can't really find or pinpoint an area in which Matt Gaetz benefits, the Republican Party in terms of electability or in terms of voting preference or voting margin. Right now, this 303 map that we're using, because the map did change, it's no longer 306, so keep that in mind. A number of states did change in electoral count, both up and down. But for Joe Biden to be at 303, if anything, he would expand this. Matt Gaetz is not some revolutionary, dark horse candidate. If anything, he's probably one of the most unpopular ones at that. And the fact that, we are still seeing some Republicans peel away from him, this likely applies to the national level, because if voters in his district who chose to re-elect him and voted to elect him in the first place are in a position where some of these Republicans amongst his own party are saying, I think he's guilty, I think he should resign, that does sort of tell us on a more balanced electorate nationwide that enough Republicans would be moving away that it could have a significant impact on the outcome of the election. Now, it's not going to be as extreme enough to say that South Dakota and North Dakota would turn blue, but what's to say that maybe North Carolina wouldn't? Or maybe we would see a victory for Joe Biden or Kamala Harris, but it seems as if he's addressing Joe Biden, maybe in Florida. I mean, Matt Gaetz certainly would be one of the weakest GOP candidates for 2024, but sometimes those weak candidates decide to run. Donald Trump's 2016 Republican primary victory wasn't easily won. It was hard fought. It was something that President Trump needed to do in order to get to this position amongst a number of establishment names. But that didn't necessarily mean that the Republican primary had all of the best candidates, even though Donald Trump was in a position where he, could have lost the primary had they coalesced around one candidate. Do I think Ted Cruz would have beaten Hillary Clinton? No. Do I think Marco Rubio would have defeated Hillary Clinton? No. Do I believe that John Kasich would have defeated Hillary Clinton? The answer is no. I stand by this, that looking back at the 2016 election, the only Republican who could have defeated Hillary Clinton was Donald Trump, because he revolutionized the party. He revolutionized the electoral map in favor of the GOP. He took down that blue wall that hadn't been broken, all three, since 1984, Ronald Reagan's re-election. But if you look what happened, the primary process was quite interesting. Donald Trump wasn't always leading in the polls. In fact, for a very long period of time, he wasn't leading at all. The polling data told us that some of these more establishment candidates were going to do well. And of course, some of them did do well. Ted Cruz got second place. He's a senator. Marco Rubio got third place. He's a senator. You have Governor John Kasich, who got fourth place. Looking at some of these numbers, some of these more establishment candidates did do well, but that didn't necessarily mean that they were better. And, for some of these other candidates who might be entering into the 2024 race, Matt Gaetz is going to be one of those people who might be recognizable by the establishment GOP, who might have that resonation amongst a subsection of the party, not enough to win like Donald Trump did in 2016, but enough to hold some type of impact on the outcome of the primary, but still wouldn't be that electable candidate. So Matt Gaetz probably wouldn't even make it past the primary process, but it is quite interesting to see that Matt Gaetz in the first place was considering, or is considering currently, a bid for the presidency, and says in full confidence, it seems like, at least privately, or knowing that it'll go out publicly, that he believes he could defeat Joe Biden. And while we don't have any numbers between Matt Gaetz and Joe Biden, the numbers seem to tell us between Donald Trump and Joe Biden that Joe Biden is going to win by a lot. Between Joe Biden and Ron DeSantis, even bigger. Nikki Haley, even bigger. Ted Cruz, even bigger. Looking at some of these states, there is no real indication that Joe Biden is somehow going to lose to Donald Trump in 2024, which makes me question how close Matt Gaetz would get if Donald Trump couldn't really even come within striking distance. This scandal that seems to be tackling onto him American politics is optics. Even if this was something that was unfounded, the same way that the calling the election results rigged was unfounded. Obviously, these aren't unfounded claims. Otherwise, you would not necessarily see such a large investigation and inquiry into it. But for Matt Gaetz' situation, if this was something unfounded, it still would look negative. The way that the emails looked negative for Hillary Clinton, the way that Benghazi looked negative for Hillary Clinton. After $25 million and hours of days and weeks and months of investigation, years of investigation at that, countless hours testifying, they found nothing about Hillary Clinton. But the few things you do remember about her were Pokemon Go to the polls, Benghazi, and emails. That was it. That is it for Hillary Clinton. For Matt Gaetz, this is his email scandal times 10. Because for as much as the GOP would like to try to insinuate that Joe Biden is a pedophile, that Joe Biden is someone who is, in whatever type of regard that they do try to paint Joe Biden in such a negative light, what can they say if Matt Gaetz is that nominee? What can they say if Matt Gaetz is running for president? I mean, Matt Gaetz would give such a negative image towards the GOP, but it's entirely up to him if he wants to run, because no one can really stop him. And he does have not a large portion of the Republican base, I would say, in terms of support, but he does have that subsection that might closely associate him with President Trump. And if President Trump doesn't decide to run, Matt Gaetz probably wouldn't win the primary, but might make hold some type of impact on the outcome of it, and might be a top candidate at some point. 3 years out, he isn't a top candidate, but if he's very serious about this claim, if he truly believes he could defeat Joe Biden, he might try to funnel money and get donors and hold events to actually try to run for president in 2024. The only thing that would really be negatively impacted by this is the Republican Party, but at the end of the day, it's Matt Gaetz' choice and Matt Gaetz' race to lose. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 midterm election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.